Cold October evening, 1953. The air in Blackwater Hollow, West Virginia, hung heavy with coal dust and something darker, the stench of desperation. In the center of town, near the old company warehouse, a crowd had gathered. Men with blackened hands from the mines, women in patched dresses, elderly folks who'd seen better days, all stood silent, afraid to breathe too loud. In the center of the circle stood a man of modest height, maybe 5'6" at most, but with the bearing of someone who'd stared down death and walked away. Next to him towered a 6'7" mountain of muscle and scars. The silent giant everyone knew as Rufus. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. At their feet, on his knees in the October mud, knelt Red Pete Dalton. Yesterday, still Dwight Crow's most trusted lieutenant. Today, a traitor who'd sold out his own people for $300 and a promise of immunity from the coal company's enforcers. Dwight slowly pulled out his combat knife from Korea, the same K-bar he'd carried from Incheon to the Yalu River, the blade that had tasted Chinese blood in frozen trenches. Pete started babbling about his family, about hungry kids, about medical bills he couldn't pay. But Dwight raised his hand, the one that still worked right, the one the shrapnel hadn't mangled. The silence became absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then he did something no one expected. He turned away from Pete and faced the crowd, his voice carrying across the assembled townspeople. Watch closely, all of you. Watch and remember what happens to those who betray their own. Not for my sake, for yours. Because what I'm about to do, I do for every one of you. Then he turned back to Pete, knife glinting in the lamplight, but to understand what happened in that moment, to really understand the legend of the Blackwater Brotherhood, we need to go back 18 months, to the day when Sergeant Dwight Crow, formerly of the 2nd Infantry Division, returned from the war to his hometown. May 14th, 1952. The Greyhound bus pulled into Blackwater Hollow just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains blood red. Dwight Crow stepped off with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a limp he'd carried the rest of his life. He'd left this town 3 years ago as a kid of 19, all fired up with patriotic fever and John Wayne fantasies. He returned at 22, looking 40 and feeling older. He returned a hero. Bronze Star with V device for valor, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, Silver Star that the captain had pinned on him in a field hospital while they dug shrapnel out of his left arm. 2 personal commendations from General MacArthur himself, though Dwight had never been close enough to the general to spit on him. He returned crippled. The Chinese grenade that had torn up his arm in the winter of '51 left him with permanent nerve damage. He could hold a rifle, just barely, could work a shovel, but the fine motor control, the strength he'd need for 12-hour shifts in the mines, that was gone forever. He returned to a hell that made the frozen Chosin Reservoir look like a Sunday picnic. Locals who were there that evening recalled the moment Dwight stepped onto Main Street. The first thing he saw was old Mrs. Fletcher, Emily Fletcher, who'd made the best apple pies in 3 counties before the war, down on her hands and knees in the town square, eating dandelion greens. Not picking them to take home and cook, eating them raw, right there on the ground, like a grazing animal. Dwight walked over slowly, his combat boots loud on the empty street. He bent down, helped the old woman to her feet. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, and she'd been a solid woman before the war. Mrs. Fletcher looked at his uniform, at the ribbons and medals, and laughed. It was a terrible sound, like something breaking inside a person's soul. "A hero comes home," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "Ain't that something?" A genuine war hero right here in Blackwater Hollow. She touched one of his medals with a trembling finger. What good did it do, son? What good did any of it do? We've been dying here while you boys been off killing Chinamen. Company shut down Shaft 3 and 49, laid off 200 men. Shut down Shaft 7 last year, another 300. Food prices went up 40%. Wages stayed the same for those lucky enough to still have work. We're all heroes here, boy. Heroes at starving slow. Dwight didn't know what to say to that, so he helped her home to a house that looked like a strong wind might knock it over, and gave her the chocolate bar he'd saved from his last care package. She cried when she took it, and that made something twist in Dwight's chest that hurt worse than the shrapnel had. The town that greeted him was a ghost of what he remembered. Blackwater Hollow had always been a hard place. Coal mining towns don't produce soft people. But it had been alive once, vibrant in its way. Now half the storefronts on Main Street were boarded up. The company store had tripled its prices while the mine wages stayed frozen. The company owned everything: the houses, the store, the water rights, even the graveyard where you'd get buried if the mountain took you. His own house still stood, one of the small frame houses on Strikers Row that the company had built back in the 1920s for the miners. But when his mother opened the door, Dwight barely recognized her. Martha Crow had been a strong woman, tall and proud, with hands that could work a washboard all day and still make a dinner that'd fill a grown man. The woman who hugged him now felt like she was made of twigs wrapped in loose skin. "Dwight," she whispered against his chest. My boy came home." He held her carefully, afraid she might break. Over her shoulder he could see into the kitchen, one can of beans on the shelf, a half loaf of bread that looked 3 days old. Nothing else. The icebox stood open and empty because there was no money for ice and nothing to keep cold anyway. "Mama," he said quietly, "how long's it been like this?" She pulled back, tried to smile. "Oh, we get by. I got my survivor's benefits from your daddy, $28 a month, and I take in washing when I can. We get by." His father had died in a shaft collapse in 1947, one of 19 men who suffocated when a support beam failed. The company had paid out a $100 death benefit and called it square. His mother's survivor's benefit was what the union had managed to negotiate before the company broke the union in '48. That first evening, while his mother slept the thin sleep of the malnourished, Dwight sat on the porch and took stock. The war had taught him to assess situations quickly, to see the tactical reality beneath the surface chaos. And the reality here was simple and terrible. The coal company, Appalachian Consolidated Mining, had Blackwater Hollow by the throat and was squeezing. The company had always been ruthless, that was nothing new. But there'd been a balance before, an unspoken understanding. The company took most of the profit, sure, but the miners got enough to live on. Their families didn't starve, kids went to school, people had dignity. That balance was gone, and sitting at the top of the company food chain, running Blackwater Hollow like a feudal fiefdom, was Silas Brennan. Brennan came calling that first night around 9 o'clock. Dwight heard the Cadillac before he saw it, a '52 Coupe de Ville, cream-colored, with white-wall tires and chrome that gleamed even in the dark. Must have cost $5,000 easy. That was 3 years' wages for a miner, if a miner could find work. Silas Brennan was a big man, 6'2" and running to fat in the way of men who eat well while others starve. Red-faced with small piggy eyes that never stopped calculating. He'd come up through the company ranks the old-fashioned way, by selling out anyone who got in his way and knowing exactly whose boots to lick in Charleston. He came with gifts, a bottle of genuine Kentucky bourbon, not the rot-gut moonshine the local boys made, a carton of Lucky Strikes, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dwight Crow," Brennan's voice boomed across the yard.
By God, the war hero returns. Heard you did us proud over there in Korea. Heard you killed your share of Reds. Dwight stood up slowly. Mr. Brennan, call me Silas, son. No need for formalities among patriots. He climbed the porch steps, set the bourbon and cigarettes on the rail. Thought we'd drink to your homecoming. Celebrate, proper. It's late, Mr. Brennan. My mother's sleeping. Course. Won't stay long. But he was already pulling out 2 glasses, brought his own, which told Dwight this wasn't a casual visit. Just wanted to welcome you back, personal-like, and talk about your future. They sat, and Brennan poured 3 fingers of bourbon into each glass. Dwight watched the amber liquid catch the porch light and thought about how many meals that bottle could buy. Now then, Brennan said, raising his glass, to American fighting men, to victory over the communist menace, and to your safe return. They drank. The bourbon burned smooth and expensive, nothing like the raw moonshine Dwight had shared with his squad in Korea. You're probably wondering about employment, Brennan continued. I know the mines are tight right now. Damn unions drove costs up so high we had to make cuts. But for a war hero, I can find something. Not shaft work, not with that arm, but maybe a shift foreman position. Light duty, good pay, 70 cents an hour, 3 days a week, guaranteed. Dwight did the math instantly. 70 cents an hour, 8 hours a day, 3 days a week. That was $16.80 a week, about $70 a month. Barely enough to cover rent on a company house, groceries from the company store at their inflated prices, and utilities. No room for anything extra. No room for medical care, clothes, or saving for the future. Before the war, a full-time miner made $80 a week. That's generous, Mr. Brennan, Dwight said carefully. Thought you'd appreciate it. Just need you to understand something, son. Brennan's voice dropped, lost the false joviality. Town's different now than when you left. We had some trouble in '49, some agitators trying to reorganize the Union. Communists, most of them, or fellow travelers. We dealt with it, but it made things tense. What I need from you is simple. You work hard, keep your head down, don't cause trouble. Do that, you'll eat regular. Your mama, too. And if I don't? Brennan's smile never wavered. Then life gets difficult. See, I got friends all the way up to Charleston. Got the sheriff, got the state police, got judges who owe me favors. Boy like you, with a bad conduct discharge? Honorable, Dwight interrupted. Honorable discharge? Sure, but paperwork gets lost sometimes, or maybe confused. Be a shame if you ended up on a list somewhere. Communist sympathizers, security risks, that sort of thing. Make it real hard to find work anywhere in the state. He stood up, collected his bottle and glasses. Think about my offer. And Dwight, those medals you earned, they don't mean shit in Blackwater Hollow. Only thing that matters here is whether you're with the company or against it. After Brennan's Cadillac pulled away, Dwight sat in the darkness for a long time. Inside, his mother moaned in her sleep, the sound of someone whose body hurt too much to rest quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The last dog in Blackwater Hollow, probably. They'd eaten the rest over the winter when the food ran out. That's when Dwight Crow made his decision. If the law protected men like Brennan instead of people like his mother, then the law had failed. If the government that sent him to die in Korea couldn't feed its own people at home, then the government had failed. If working within the system meant watching his neighbors starve while rich men got richer, then the system itself was the enemy. He'd spent 3 years fighting communists. Now he was going to become what Brennan feared most, not a communist, but something more dangerous. An American who'd decided that justice mattered more than law. He'd build a new kind of organization, not a union. They'd crushed the unions.
Not a political movement. They owned the politicians. Something older. Something that went back to the coal wars of the 20s, to the Molly Maguires, to the guerrilla fighters who'd burned aristocrats' plantations in the Revolution. He'd build an outlaw brotherhood. And if blood had to be spilled to feed hungry children, then by God, blood would spill. The next morning, Dwight's life changed again in a way he never expected. He was walking through the woods toward the neighboring town of Ridgemont, hoping to trade his Bronze Star medal for food. The thought made him sick, but medals don't fill stomachs. He took the old deer trail through Blackthorn Forest, the same path he'd walked as a kid. About 2 miles in, he heard something that didn't belong, a sound halfway between a groan and an animal's whimper. Combat instincts kicked in. Dwight froze, listening, placing the sound. It came from down in the ravine, near where Old Man Hutchins used to dig wolf pits back before the war. Dwight approached carefully, keeping low. The sound came again, more desperate. He peered over the edge of the ravine and saw something that made his blood run cold, even after everything he'd seen in Korea. At the bottom of a wolf pit, must have been 12 feet deep, lay a man. Or what was left of a man. He was massive, easily 6'7", with shoulders like a bull's. But he'd been starved down to something barely human, all bones and stretched skin and festering wounds. His clothes were rags. His hair and beard had grown wild, making him look more beast than man. And his face, Christ, his face. The mouth was wrong, twisted, and when the man looked up at Dwight, he opened his mouth in a silent scream, and Dwight saw why. Someone had cut out his tongue. Not surgically, not clean. They'd carved it out, rough, leaving a mass of scar tissue where a man's voice should be. The giant saw Dwight and tried to scramble backward, impossible in the narrow pit. Pure animal terror in his eyes. But then he stopped, looked at Dwight's uniform, at the ribbons. Something changed in his expression. He raised one massive hand and tapped it against the dirt wall of the pit. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Morse code. Jesus Christ, Dwight breathed. You were military. The man nodded frantically, then held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Please, help. Don't hurt me. Dwight's mind raced. A man this size, this desperate, could easily have been mistaken for a vagrant or criminal. The locals probably trapped him, figured they'd let him starve rather than risk letting him out. I'm not gonna hurt you, Dwight called down. I'm gonna get you out, but you gotta trust me. You understand? The giant nodded slowly. Hope flickered in those haunted eyes. Getting a 6'7" man out of a 12-foot pit with one good arm, that was a problem. But Dwight had solved harder problems in Korea. He found a length of thick vine, tested it. Strong enough. Made a loop, lowered it down. Put this under your arms, he instructed. The man did, moving slowly like he expected a trick. Dwight found a sturdy tree, wrapped the vine around it, and started hauling. It took every ounce of strength he had left, and by the time he'd pulled the giant up to where he could climb out himself, Dwight's bad arm was screaming in agony. The man collapsed on the ground beside the pit, gasping. Up close, he was even more horrifying, covered in scars, some old, some infected. The one across his throat looked like someone had tried to cut his head off and stopped halfway. Probably the same person who'd taken his tongue. Dwight pulled out his canteen, offered it. The giant stared at it like he'd never seen water before, then snatched it and drank so fast he choked. Easy, Dwight said. Slow down or you'll make yourself sick. When the man had drunk his fill, Dwight offered him the last of the bread he'd brought from home, just a couple of biscuits, but all he had. The giant took them with trembling hands and ate slowly this time, tears streaming down his face. You got a name? Dwight asked. The man thought for a moment, then scratched in the dirt with a stick. Are you F-U-S? Rufus. All right. I'm Dwight. You understand English, Rufus? Nod. You can hear me fine, just can't talk? Another nod. What happened to you? Were you in the war? Rufus's face twisted. He held up his hands, started a series of gestures. Some were obvious, pointing to himself, then at the sky, making airplane motions. Others, Dwight had to puzzle out. But slowly, haltingly, a story emerged. Rufus had been a tail gunner on a B-17, shot down over Germany in 1944. He survived the crash but was captured. The Germans, or maybe it was the SS, the distinction got blurry in Rufus's gestures, tortured him for information. When he wouldn't talk, they cut out his tongue to make an example. Somehow he'd survived until the American Army liberated his camp in 45. But then came the betrayal that broke him. The liberating American officer took one look at the prisoners, emaciated, broken, many of them with suspicious connections to communist resistance groups, and decided they might be security risks. Instead of heroes' welcomes, they got interrogations. Instead of going home, they got processed through security screening. Rufus, unable to speak, unable to explain himself, got classified as potentially unreliable. They sent him to a military psychiatric facility for evaluation. He'd escaped 6 months ago and had been living in the woods ever since, too scared to approach people, too traumatized to trust anyone in uniform. Until the locals found him, thought he was a criminal or crazy person, and trapped him in that pit to die. Dwight listened to all this, his jaw clenched tighter with each revelation. He'd fought for 3 years in Korea, bled for his country, killed for his country. And this is what America did to its heroes? Let them starve in holes in the ground? Rufus, he said when the story was done, I got a proposition for you. I aim to cause some trouble around here. Righteous trouble, but trouble nonetheless. I need someone I can trust, someone strong, someone who ain't gonna run to the law because the law don't give a damn about you any more than it does about me. You interested? Rufus stared at him for a long moment. Then he struggled to his feet, all 6'7" of him, looking like a skeleton wrapped in leather, and dropped to one knee. He placed his right hand over his heart in a gesture so formal it might have been funny if it wasn't so serious. An oath, a pledge, a bond sealed not with words but with something deeper than words. All right then, Dwight said, helping him up. Welcome to whatever the hell this is going to be. Bringing Rufus home caused a stir. Martha Crow took one look at the giant shambling through her door, filthy and scarred and terrifying, and nearly screamed. But then she saw how Dwight treated him, with respect, with kindness, and her own compassion kicked in. Lord have mercy, she whispered, seeing how Rufus devoured the thin soup she heated up. What did they do to you, son? Rufus just looked at her with those haunted eyes and ate until the bowl was empty. That night, while Rufus slept on the floor because he was too big for the spare bed, Dwight sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, working out a plan. His mother sat across from him, watching. Dwight, she said quietly, what are you thinking about? Thinking about how many people in this town are hungry, Mama. Thinking about how much food the companies got locked up in warehouses while folks starve. Thinking about Silas Brennan's Cadillac and your $28 a month. Don't do anything foolish. Foolish would be doing nothing. I didn't survive Korea to watch you starve. She reached across the table, took his hand. Your father tried to fight them, you know. Back in 42, when they cut wages during the war. He organized a work slowdown. Company had him arrested, said he was interfering with the war effort. They would have sent him to federal prison if he hadn't agreed to stop. It broke something in him, I think. That's part of why he was in that shaft the day it collapsed.
He volunteered for the most dangerous work to prove he wasn't a coward. I ain't afraid of them, Mama. I know. That's what scares me. Over the next few days, Dwight learned that Rufus was more than just muscle. The silent giant proved to be remarkably intelligent. Before the war, he'd worked as a clerk at a grain elevator in Ohio, handling inventory and logistics. He knew supply chains, distribution systems, security protocols. They developed a simple sign language, building on the basic gestures Rufus already used. Within a week, they could hold complex conversations. And Rufus had information that changed everything. One evening, using a stick and dirt in the backyard, Rufus drew a map. He pointed to 3 locations on the outskirts of Blackwater Hollow, then made gestures. Hidden warehouses, full of food, company-controlled. Dwight stared at the map. How do you know this? Rufus gestured, watching, observing. He'd spent months in the woods, and from his hiding spots he'd seen trucks making deliveries to these locations at night. Food that should have gone to the company store was being diverted, stockpiled. Brennan was probably selling it on the black market, reporting it as spoilage or rodent damage and pocketing the difference. Son of a bitch, Dwight muttered, then louder, son of a bitch! That's when he knew what had to be done. Recruiting wasn't hard. Every veteran in Blackwater Hollow had come home to the same raw deal. Most were like Dwight, proud men who'd done their duty, expecting nothing more than a fair shake and finding less than nothing. The first one Dwight approached was Hank Mercer, who'd lost his right leg below the knee to a landmine at Porkchop Hill. Hank lived in a one-room shack with his wife and 2 kids, working whatever odd jobs he could find, which wasn't many because who wants to hire a one-legged man? Dwight found him chopping wood in his yard, working with the kind of grim determination that keeps a man alive when he's got nothing left but determination. Hank, Dwight said, got a minute? Hank straightened up, wiped sweat from his face. Dwight Crow, heard you was back. Welcome home. Thanks. How you been? Getting by. Which was obviously a lie. Hank's kids looked half-starved, and his wife had that hollow-eyed look of someone who's given up her own portions to feed her children. Listen, Dwight said, I'm putting together something. Can't say much out here, but it's about making things right, about feeding our families. You interested in hearing more? Hank's eyes narrowed. What kind of something? The kind that might land us in jail if we get caught, but the kind that'll make sure your kids don't go to bed hungry. Hank looked at his woodpile, at his shack, at the hollow-eyed faces watching from the window. Then he looked at Dwight and nodded once. I'm listening. The second recruit was Sam Keene, a Marine who'd fought at the Chosin Reservoir, same place Dwight had earned his Silver Star. Sam was younger than the others, only 21, but the war had aged him 30 years. He had the shakes, what the docs called combat fatigue, and couldn't hold down regular work because of it. Sam lived with his elderly parents, both of them sick, both of them slowly dying from black lung disease after 40 years in the mines. The company had denied their medical claims, said black lung wasn't a real condition, was just old age and weak constitutions. Sam, Dwight said, finding him at the town's one remaining bar, nursing a beer he probably couldn't afford. Need to talk to you. Sam looked up with eyes that had seen too much. Dwight, heard you was organizing something. Word travels fast in small towns. Might be. Count me in. You don't know what it is yet. Sam laughed, a bitter sound. Don't matter. Whatever it is, it's better than this. I watched 17 men freeze to death at Chosin. Watched them die so Americans back home could stay free. And for what? So my parents could starve to death while the company gets rich? Yeah, I'm in. Whatever it is, I'm in. The third was Vernon Spike Walsh, an ex-paratrooper who'd made 3 combat jumps in Korea.
Spike was dangerous, the kind of man who'd learned to like violence, who'd come back from the war missing something essential in his humanity. But he was loyal to his own, and he hated Silas Brennan with the kind of personal hatred that made him useful. Brennan had fired Spike from the mines after he'd gotten into a fight with a foreman who'd been shorting the miners' pay. Blackballed him throughout the county. Spike's wife had left him, taken their daughter because Spike couldn't provide for them anymore. "I'll do it," Spike said when Dwight found him. "Whatever you're planning, count me in. But I got one condition. When it's time to deal with Brennan, I get first shot at him." "No promises," Dwight said. "But if we do this right, there'll be plenty to go around." The first meeting happened on October 10th, 1952, in the basement of an abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The church had burned down during a lightning storm in 1948, and all that remained was the stone foundation and the basement, which had been used for storage. Now it was just empty space, dark and forgotten. Perfect for conspiracy. Dwight had brought 4 men, Hank, Sam, Spike, and Rufus. The silent giant crouched in the corner, watching the entrance with the vigilance of someone who'd learned that trust could get you killed. "All right," Dwight began, standing in a shaft of moonlight from a broken window. "You all know why we're here. Oh, you think you do. But let me lay it out plain. We're gonna rob from the coal company. We're gonna take food they've been hoarding and give it to folks who need it. We're gonna do it smart, quiet, and organized. This ain't about revenge, it's about justice." "Bullshit," Spike said. "It's about revenge and you know it. Call it what you want. But there's rules, and if you can't follow them, you can leave right now." Dwight pulled out a sheet of paper he'd written the night before. By candlelight, he read, "Rule 1. We don't steal from working people. Only from the company, only from those who got rich off our suffering. Rule 2. Violence only when necessary. We ain't murderers, we're soldiers fighting a different kind of war. Rule 3. Everything we take gets divided 3 ways. 1/3 to the neediest families, 1/3 to operating expenses, 1/3 split among those who participated in the action. Rule 4. No one talks. Ever. To anyone. Informers get dealt with. Permanent. Rule 5. We protect the weak. Women, children, elderly, anyone who hurts them answers to all of us. Rule 6. If you're captured, you keep your mouth shut. We'll break you out if we can, but you don't give up names. Ever. Rule 7. This is a brotherhood. We look after our own, and our own look after us. He looked up from the paper. Those are the rules. They ain't negotiable. You in or out? One by one they nodded, even Spike, who looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. Good. Now here's how this is going to work. The first operation happened 3 nights later, on October 13th, 1952. Rufus had scouted Warehouse 3 for a week, mapping out the security, the schedule, the vulnerabilities. There was only one guard, Pete "Whiskey" Dalton, who'd earned his nickname honestly. Pete was a local drunk who'd been given the job because Brennan knew he'd take a bottle of cheap bourbon in lieu of proper wages. The plan was simple. Rufus would create a distraction, drawing Pete away from the warehouse. The others would move in, break the lock, load up what they could carry on a borrowed truck, and vanish before anyone knew what happened. They met at midnight in the woods behind the warehouse. Dwight had commandeered his neighbor's Ford pickup. Old man Fletcher had loaned it without questions, just said, "Bring her back with gas in the tank." Everyone in Blackwater Hollow knew something was brewing, and most approved, even if they didn't know the details. "Remember," Dwight said quietly, "in and out fast. We take half of what's there, no more. Leave enough that they might not notice for a day or two."
Why not take it all? Spike asked. Because if we take it all, they'll turn this place upside down looking for it. We take half, hide it good. They might write it off as inventory error or rats. Buy us time. Sam was watching the warehouse through binoculars. Pete's making his rounds, weaving pretty good. Looks like he started drinking early. Good. Rufus, you're up. The giant nodded and melted into the shadows. For a man his size, Rufus moved with unnatural quiet, a skill he'd learned surviving alone in the woods for months. 5 minutes passed. Then they heard it, a scream, high and terrified, coming from the far side of the warehouse. Pete's voice shrieking something about a monster, a demon. Oh God, oh God, oh God! Through the binoculars, Sam watched Pete run past, dropping his flashlight, stumbling over his own feet in his panic. He's heading for town, moving fast. Go, Dwight ordered. They moved as a unit, the way soldiers do. Hank covered the approach despite his prosthetic leg. Sam reached the door first, pulled out the bolt cutters they'd borrowed from the mine. The lock snapped with a satisfying crack. Inside the warehouse was everything Rufus had promised. Sacks of flour, rice, and sugar, crates of canned goods, vegetables, fruit, meat, even some luxuries, coffee, chocolate, cigarettes, all of it marked property of Appalachian Consolidated Mining Company. All of it bought with money that should have gone into miners' wages. Take the staples first, Dwight said. Flour, rice, beans, things that keep. Then canned goods, no luxuries. We ain't here to get rich. They worked fast, loading the truck bed. Hank kept watch while the others hauled. Within 20 minutes, they had half the warehouse inventory stacked and secured. That's enough, Dwight said. Let's move. They drove out with the headlights off, navigating by moonlight, Rufus riding in the back to make sure nothing fell off. They stashed the truck in an old mining shed 3 miles away, covered it with tarps, and dispersed to their homes. The entire operation took 35 minutes. Distribution was the trickier part. Dwight had made a list, every family in Blackwater Hollow who was struggling, ranked by need. Widows with children at the top, then elderly couples, then families where the breadwinner was injured or unemployed. Starting just before dawn, Rufus and Sam made deliveries. They'd leave a bag or box on each doorstep, knock once, and vanish before anyone could see them. Nothing too much, just enough to last a family a week, maybe 2 if they stretched it. Mrs. Fletcher opened her door at 5:30 a.m. to find 2 sacks of flour, a bag of rice, and 3 cans of vegetables. She stood there in her nightgown, staring at the food like she'd never seen such a thing. Then she fell to her knees right there on her porch and wept. Her grandson, 8-year-old Tommy Fletcher, came running when he heard her crying. He found his grandmother clutching a sack of flour, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, whispering, "Angels. The angels came. Thank you, Jesus. The angels came." At the Walsh house, widow Mary Walsh with 4 kids under 10, husband killed in a mine accident 2 years back, a similar scene played out. The oldest boy, Jake, found the box and carried it inside, calling for his mother. When she saw what was in it, she sat down hard in the kitchen chair and didn't move for 5 minutes, just stared at the food like she was afraid it might vanish if she looked away. By noon, half the town knew something had happened. People were talking in whispers, afraid to say too much out loud, but unable to contain their excitement. Food had appeared. Not much, but enough. And everyone knew where it had come from, even if nobody would say it out loud. They'd stolen from the company. Someone had finally stolen from the company and given to the people who needed it. Silas Brennan didn't learn about the robbery until 2 days later. Pete Whiskey had been so drunk and terrified that he'd hidden in his brother's house for 48 hours, too scared to face Brennan's wrath. When he finally stumbled into the company office, still half drunk and babbling about a 7-foot demon with glowing eyes, Brennan nearly shot him on the spot. Instead, he drove out to Warehouse 3 himself,
bringing two of his enforcers, Carl and Eugene Dirksen, brothers who'd learned their trade breaking strikes for the company back in the 30s. The broken lock told its own story. Inside, the missing inventory was obvious even to someone who wasn't expecting it. "How much?" Brennan asked Carl, who'd been a quartermaster in the army and knew inventory. Carl walked the warehouse, checking manifests against actual stock. "Best guess? 2,000 pounds of dry goods, maybe 500 cans. Call it $400 wholesale, probably 600 retail." Son of a bitch. Brennan's face had gone an ugly shade of purple. Who the fuck did this?" "Pete said something about a giant," Eugene offered. 7 feet tall, he said. "Could be he was just drunk, seeing things, or what? There's talk in town about Dwight Crow organizing something. Bunch of veterans who ain't happy about their situations." "Crow." Brennan spat the name like a curse. "That little shit with his medals and his attitude. Yeah, this smells like him." "Want us to pay him a visit?" Carl asked, cracking his knuckles. "No, not yet. He's got no proof. We got no proof. But I want eyes on him. I want to know every person he talks to, everywhere he goes, and if he steps out of line even once, I want him in chains." 3 days after the robbery, Dwight got a summons to Brennan's office. He went openly, during daylight, walking up Main Street like he had nothing to hide. Rufus wanted to come along, but Dwight refused. "This is talk, not trouble. Yet. You showing up would escalate things." Rufus had given him a look that said he didn't like it, but he obeyed. Brennan's office was on the top floor of the company building, the only 3-story structure in Blackwater Hollow. Plush carpet, oak paneling, air conditioning, luxury that stood in stark contrast to the shotgun shacks where the miners lived. Brennan sat behind his desk like a king on a throne. "Sit down, Crow." "I'll stand, thanks." "Suit yourself. You know why you're here?" "Gotta guess." "Don't play games with me, boy. Someone robbed company property. Someone distributed that property around town. And funny thing, it all happened right after you came back from the war with your head full of heroic bullshit. I've been home less than a month, Mr. Brennan. Barely got my feet under me. You really think I organized a robbery? I think you're exactly the type to pull something like this. Young, angry, thinks the world owes him something because he went off and played soldier." Dwight's jaw clenched. "I didn't play soldier. I killed people. Watched my friends die. Did things I ain't proud of so people back here could stay free. Don't you dare call it playing." "Touched a nerve, did I?" Brennan smiled. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I don't have proof yet, but I will. And when I do, you're going to federal prison. They don't treat Robin Hood types kindly in federal prison." "Is that all?" "No. I'm also going to make you an offer. One time only. You want to work for me? Really work, I mean. Help me keep order in this town. Make sure the troublemakers stay quiet. I'll pay you good. $150 a week. Steady work. Your mother won't have to worry about money ever again." Dwight took a step closer to the desk. Brennan's hand moved toward the drawer where everyone knew he kept a .38 revolver. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Brennan," Dwight said quietly. "I spent 3 years in Korea fighting communists because they want to take away American freedom. Know what I realized when I got back here? You're doing the same thing they are. Taking away freedom, stealing from working people, turning Americans into slaves. Only difference is you wave the flag while you do it. Watch your mouth, boy." "Or what? You'll have me arrested?" "Go ahead. But before you do, you might want to check your office safe. Bottom drawer, right side behind the false panel." Brennan's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the ledgers you keep there. The real ones, not the cooked books you show the taxman. The ones that show exactly how much you've been skimming off the top, how much you've been stealing from the workers' pension fund, how much you've been taking in bribes from the state inspectors to ignore safety violations. You're bluffing. Am I? See, the funny thing about having a 7-foot-tall mute who can move like a ghost, he's real good at breaking into offices when everyone's gone home. Made copies of everything. Got him in a safe place. You do anything to me or mine, those copies go straight to the FBI, to the state prosecutor, to the newspapers in Charleston. It was a bluff, mostly. Rufus had broken into the office, but the safe had been too tough to crack, and they didn't actually have the ledgers. But Brennan didn't know that, and the terror in his eyes said he believed it. "What do you want?" Brennan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to remember something. This is our town. These are our people. You've been bleeding them dry for years, and that ends now. You still get to run your mines, still get to make your profit, but the days of starving us while you get fat, those days are over. Push back, and those ledgers become public. Try to have me arrested, and those ledgers become public. Touch any of my people, and those ledgers become public. We clear?" Brennan didn't answer, just sat there with his face like spoiled milk. Dwight turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Brennan, I didn't rob that warehouse. I was home with my mother all night. She'll swear to it in court if needed. Have a nice day." Word of Dwight's confrontation with Brennan spread through Blackwater Hollow like wildfire. People didn't know exactly what had been said, but they knew this. A local boy had walked into the lion's den and walked back out unscathed. More than that, he'd put the fear of God into Silas Brennan. That changed things. Over the next 2 weeks, more veterans came to Dwight. Some wanted to join the Brotherhood. Others just wanted to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him that someone standing up to the company meant more than he could know. But Dwight understood that what he'd started couldn't remain small and informal. If they were going to keep operating, they needed structure, organization, the military precision he'd learned in Korea. He called a second meeting, this time with 10 men instead of 4. Besides the original crew, he'd recruited Michael Demo Sullivan, explosives expert who'd served in the Army Corps of Engineers. Demo was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who could build a bomb from fertilizer and household chemicals, or defuse a German mine with his eyes closed. He'd come home to find his brother dead from black lung, his mother begging on street corners because the company had denied her husband's benefits. Peter Doc Morrison, former Army medic who'd patched up more gut wounds and bullet holes than he cared to count. Doc had a morphine problem from self-medicating his own war injuries, but his hands were steady when they needed to be. He ran a kind of underground clinic out of his basement, treating miners who couldn't afford the company doctor. Andrew Quiet Hayes, sniper, 143 confirmed kills in Korea. Quiet was a Crow Indian from Montana who'd moved to West Virginia for work and stayed for a wife who'd died of pneumonia the winter before. He was maybe the scariest of the bunch, not because he was violent, but because of how calm he was. Like nothing could touch him, because he'd already seen the worst the world had to offer. And there were 3 others, coal miners who'd been blacklisted for union activity, whose names Dwight kept separate from the core group for security reasons. "All right," Dwight said, standing in the center of the church basement while 10 men watched him. "We done good with the warehouse. People are eating better and nobody got caught. But we can't just keep robbing warehouses and hoping we don't get caught. We need to think bigger. Think longer term." "What are you proposing?" Hank asked. "A real organization, with structure, discipline, intelligence gathering, like how the Army works, but for this." He pulled out a sheet of paper with organizational charts he'd drawn up. "We divide into cells. Each cell has a specific job. Hank, you're intelligence. Your job is finding targets, gathering information on company activities, security vulnerabilities. Sam, your communications. You handle recruitment, coordinate between cells, make sure everyone knows what they need to know and nothing more. Spike, your operations. When we need to hit a target, you plan and execute. Demo, you're technical. Locks, safes, anything that needs to be opened or closed. Doc, you're our safety net, medical care for anyone who gets hurt, and you're our cover story. If anyone asks, we're all part of your medical charity helping poor families. Quiet, you're security, internal and external. You watch for informants, company spies, anyone who might compromise us. He looked around the room, and Rufus is my second in command. What I say goes, but if something happens to me, you follow him. He can't talk, one of the miners said. Don't need to talk to give orders, just need to be smart and loyal. Rufus is both. The giant nodded from his position by the door, acknowledging the responsibility. Questions? Yeah, Spike said. What about Brennan? When do we deal with him? We don't. Not yet. Right now, he's scared. Scared men make mistakes. We let him make mistakes. We document those mistakes. And when the time's right, we bury him with his own crimes. But we don't touch him directly unless he forces our hand. That clear? Reluctant nods. Good. Now, here's the next operation. Over the following months, the Brotherhood expanded and evolved. They hit 3 more warehouses, always taking just enough to feed hungry families, but not enough to trigger a massive investigation. They intercepted a shipment of medical supplies meant for the company doctor and distributed them through Doc Morrison's underground clinic. They broke into the company store at night and redistributed winter coats to children who'd been going without. And they established their first real rule of law, their own justice system for when the regular law failed. The code was simple. 1. Don't steal from working people. Ever. 2. Protect women and children above all else. 3. Informants get marked so everyone knows them. 4. Rapists and child abusers get special treatment. 5. The Brotherhood takes care of its own. Members' families get protected even if the member is captured or killed. 6. Violence is a last resort, but when it's necessary, it's decisive. 7. Every action must serve the community, not personal grudges. It was Rufus who enforced most of these rules, and his methods became the stuff of legend. The first test of the Brotherhood's justice system came in December 1952. A girl named Sarah McBride, 16 years old, worked as a cleaner at the company hotel. She was pretty, in that way young mountain girls are, fresh-faced, hopeful, still believing life might get better. One of Brennan's enforcers, a man named Leo Gatch, cornered her in a storage room, did things to her that left her sobbing on the floor, dress torn, spirit broken. When she tried to report it, the company sheriff, a man named Wade Corcoran, who was on Brennan's payroll, laughed in her face. Ain't no crime if a man takes what a woman's offering, Corcoran said. She was probably asking for it anyway, dressing the way she does. Sarah's father, Tom McBride, came to Dwight 3 days later. Tom was a broken man, worked 30 years in the mines before black lung forced him to retire on a pittance of a pension. His hands shook as he told the story. I can't do nothing about it, Tom said, voice raw. I try to file charges. Corcoran arrests me for filing a false report. I try to confront Gatch. His brother Carl beats me half to death. And Sarah won't even leave her room anymore. Won't eat. Just stares at the wall. I'm scared I'm gonna lose my baby girl. Dwight listened without interrupting. When Tom finished, Dwight said, I'll handle it. What are you gonna do? Better you don't know. But Leo Gatch won't hurt anyone else. That's a promise. 3 nights later, Leo Gatch went missing. He was supposed to meet his brother Carl at their usual bar. Never showed up. Carl found Leo's truck parked behind the company hotel, Keys still in the ignition, driver's door hanging open. No blood, no signs of struggle. They found him the next morning at the town square, tied to the flagpole, naked. Someone had beaten him so severely he'd lost teeth, broken ribs, one eye swollen completely shut. But the real damage was lower. They'd used a knife on him, left him unmanned in a way that would haunt him the rest of his life. On his chest, carved in shallow cuts that would scar forever, rapist. A note pinned to the flagpole read, "This is what happens to men who hurt our daughters. Let it be known throughout the land." Leo survived physically. Mentally, he was destroyed. He left West Virginia 3 days later and never came back. And the message was received loud and clear throughout Blackwater Hollow. The Brotherhood would protect their own. By spring of 1953, Dwight controlled not just Blackwater Hollow, but 3 neighboring towns. His network had grown to over 50 active members, with another 200 people who provided support, safe houses, information, alibis. They'd evolved beyond simple robbery. Now they were running what amounted to a parallel government. Economic redistribution. Taking from company stores and warehouses, yes, but also collecting fines from speculators and price gougers, redistributing those funds to families in need. Justice. Handling cases where the official law failed. Domestic abusers, crooked businessmen, violent criminals who the sheriff ignored because they paid him off. Protection. Standing between vulnerable people and those who would exploit them. Mutual aid. Running underground medical clinics, organizing food distribution, helping families whose breadwinners were injured or killed. But with power came problems. The first major problem was Rufus himself. The giant had become both the Brotherhood's greatest asset and its biggest liability. People were terrified of him, rightfully so. He'd beaten men half to death with his bare hands. He'd castrated Leo Gatch without flinching. Mothers used him as a boogeyman. Behave, or the silent man will come for you. Rufus's methods were effective, but they were also brutal, and Dwight could see the toll it was taking. The giant was losing himself in the violence, becoming the monster people thought he was. One night, after Rufus returned from handling a corrupt company accountant who'd been embezzling from the miners' pension fund, Dwight found him sitting alone in the woods behind the church, his enormous hands covered in blood. "Rufus," Dwight said quietly. The giant looked up, and Dwight saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before. Doubt. Maybe even shame. Dwight sat down next to him. "You did what needed doing." Rufus shook his head, made a gesture. Too much. Going too far. "You're the only one who can do what you do," Dwight said. "You're the hammer that keeps bad men in line. I know it's hard. I know what it costs you. But without you, we can't protect people." Rufus signed, "Becoming a monster, just like them." "No, you ain't like them. They hurt people for profit, for pleasure. You hurt people to protect the innocent. That makes all the difference." "Does it?" Rufus's gesture was bitter. Dwight didn't have an answer for that. The second problem was infiltration. Silas Brennan might have been a coward, but he wasn't stupid. He'd realized direct confrontation wouldn't work. The Brotherhood was too popular, too well connected. So he tried a different approach. Corruption. He planted a spy, Charlie Smooth Atkins, a veteran with a gambling problem and an even bigger debt to company-run gambling dens. Brennan made Charlie an offer: infiltrate the Brotherhood, report back on their activities, and the debt disappears, plus a $1,000 bonus. Charlie was smooth. That's how he got his nickname. He approached Sam Keene with a sob story about losing his job, needing to feed his kids, hearing that the Brotherhood helped people like him. Sam, trusting soul that he was, brought Charlie to Dwight. Charlie played his part perfectly. Eager to help, willing to take risks, grateful for every crumb of trust they gave him. For 2 months, he wormed his way deeper into the organization. It was Rufus who saw through him. The giant had a sixth sense for lies, probably developed during his months surviving alone when trust could mean death. He watched Charlie with those flat, measuring eyes and saw something wrong. The way Charlie's hands fidgeted when he talked. The way his eyes darted to exits. The way he asked just a few too many questions about operations he wasn't involved in. One night, Rufus followed Charlie after a meeting, watched him walk through town, looking over his shoulder, eventually slipping into the back entrance of the company building. Rufus came back and told Dwight what he'd seen. "You're sure?" Dwight asked. Rufus nodded. "God damn it. I liked Charlie." Dwight was quiet for a long moment.
"We need to be absolutely certain before we act. Can you get proof?"
The next night, Rufus broke into the company building, not hard for a man his size who moved like smoke. He found Brennan's office, found the payroll records. Charlie Smooth Atkins was listed as a security consultant, paid $500 so far, another $1,000 promised. They hauled Charlie out of bed at 3 a.m., brought him to the church basement. The other leaders were already there: Hank, Sam, Spike, Demo, Doc, Quiet. Charlie tried to play it cool at first. "What's this about, boys?" Dwight tossed the payroll records on the table. "Want to explain this?" Charlie's face went white. He looked at the exits, but Rufus stood blocking the only door, all 6'7" of him, radiating menace. "I can explain." "Don't!" Dwight's voice was cold. "Don't insult us by lying more. You sold us out. Men who trusted you, who brought you into our homes, who would have died for you. You sold them for money. You don't understand. They were going to take my kids. They said, we would have helped you with that. We help everyone who comes to us in good faith. But you didn't come in good faith. You came to betray us." Charlie started crying. "Please, Dwight, please. I made a mistake. I'll make it right. You'll do nothing, because you ain't never going to get the chance to betray anyone ever again." Dwight turned to Rufus. "You know what to do." They found Charlie 3 days later on the road to Charleston. Alive, but changed. His tongue was intact. They weren't as cruel as the Nazis who'd taken Rufus's, but he couldn't speak anymore. Fear had struck him mute. On his forehead, burned with a heated knife blade, Judas. He left West Virginia within the week, and they never heard from him again.
But the message had been sent. Betray the Brotherhood, and the silent man comes for you.
Summer 1953 brought new challenges. The Brotherhood's success had attracted attention from outside their territory, specifically from a gang of actual criminals who saw Blackwater Hollow's black market economy as an opportunity. They called themselves the Burke Brothers, though there were only 2 actual Burkes, Jimmy and Dale, both escaped convicts from a Kentucky prison. The rest of their gang was a mix of drifters, violent criminals, and men who'd discovered they preferred theft and violence to honest work. The Burkes moved into Ridgemont, the next town over, and started muscling in on local businesses. They weren't about justice or helping the poor. They just wanted money and didn't care who they hurt to get it. The first clash happened in early July. Spike was running a delivery, bags of flour and rice for families in Ridgemont, when 3 of Burke's men stopped his truck on a back road.
"Nice load you got there," one of them said, a mean-looking son of a bitch with prison tattoos and dead eyes. "We'll take it off your hands." "Like hell you will," Spike said. They beat him bloody, took the truck, and left him on the side of the road. When Rufus found him, following up because Spike hadn't reported in, Spike could barely stand. 3 broken ribs, nose broken, 1 eye swollen shut. But he was alive, and he was mad. "The Burkes," he gasped, "said they're taking over. Said if we don't like it, they'll burn down every house in Blackwater." Dwight called an emergency council meeting.
All the Corps members gathered in the church basement, plus representatives from Ridgemont and the other towns in their network. "This is different from Brennan," Dwight said. "We can intimidate Brennan because he's got something to lose: reputation, freedom, his life. The Burkes don't care about any of that. They're animals, and you can't negotiate with animals." "So what do?" Hank asked. "We go to war." The war with the Burke brothers lasted 3 weeks and cost 7 lives. Dwight approached it like the military operation it was. Quiet scouted their headquarters, an abandoned lumber mill outside Ridgemont. Demo prepared surprises for any retaliation, and Rufus became the spearhead of their assault. The plan was simple: hit them hard, hit them fast, make them afraid. The first strike happened on July 10th. The Burkes had taken over the old roadhouse on Highway 52, using it as their base. That night, while they were drinking and celebrating their takeover, Demo's explosives took out the building's support structure. The roadhouse didn't collapse completely. Demo was too skilled for something that crude. Instead, it sagged, tilting at a dangerous angle, floor buckling, walls cracking. The Burkes scrambled out in a panic, thinking it was an earthquake or some kind of structural failure. They were still scrambling when Rufus appeared. The survivors later said he came out of nowhere, moving through the darkness like death itself. 6'7", silent as a ghost, hitting men so hard they flew through the air. He didn't kill anyone. That was important. That was part of the message. But he broke bones, shattered kneecaps, made grown men cry for their mothers. By the time the county sheriff arrived, called by a terrified witness, the Burke brothers' gang was decimated. Half of them couldn't walk. The other half ran. But Jimmy Burke himself escaped, and 2 days later, he retaliated. He firebombed a house in Blackwater Hollow, a random target just to send a message. The house belonged to the Yates family. Father worked in the mines, mother took in laundry, 3 kids under 10. They got out in time, but barely. Little Emma Yates, 6 years old, inhaled enough smoke that Doc Morrison had to treat her for a week before her breathing normalized. That was the moment everything changed. "No more warning shots," Dwight said at the next council meeting. "No more sending messages. They attacked civilians, attacked children. They crossed a line." "What are you saying?" Sam asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying we finish this. Permanently." The final confrontation happened on July 31st, 1953. Quiet had tracked the Burkes to their fallback position, a hunting cabin deep in the woods, 20 miles from the nearest town. Jimmy and Dale Burke were there, along with 6 of their remaining men. They were armed, paranoid, and dangerous. Dwight brought 20 men for the assault, virtually the entire core membership of the Brotherhood. They surrounded the cabin at 2 a.m., when everyone inside would be asleep or drunk. The plan was to give them a chance to surrender, to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But Jimmy Burke had other ideas. When Dwight called out for them to come out peacefully, Burke responded with a shotgun blast that nearly took Dwight's head off.
"Fuck your surrender!" Burke screamed from inside the cabin. "Come and get us!"
So they did. Demo placed shaped charges on the cabin's supports, not to collapse it, but to breach the walls. On Dwight's signal, they blew. The walls exploded inward, stunning everyone inside. The Brotherhood poured through the gaps, moving with military precision. It was like Korea all over again, clearing bunkers, neutralizing enemies, securing positions. The fight lasted maybe 3 minutes. When it was over, 4 of Burke's men were dead, shot in the firefight. 3 were wounded and surrendered. And Jimmy and Dale Burke themselves? Rufus had them. The giant had gone straight for the Burke brothers, ignoring everyone else. He'd taken a bullet to the shoulder but didn't seem to notice. He grabbed Jimmy Burke by the throat, lifted him off his feet with one hand, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the wood. Dale tried to shoot Rufus in the back. Quiet put a bullet through Dale's hand, disarming him.
"Stop! Dwight shouted. "Rufus, stop!" The giant paused, Jimmy Burke dangling from his grip, feet kicking uselessly. "Put him down. We do this right." Rufus looked at Dwight, and for a moment Dwight wasn't sure if the giant would obey. Rufus had gone somewhere dark, somewhere beyond reason. But then, slowly, he lowered Burke to the ground. Jimmy Burke gasped for air, eyes wild with terror. "You got two choices," Dwight said, standing over him. "One, you leave West Virginia, tonight, forever. You and your brother and anyone who rode with you. You don't come back, you don't make threats, you don't even speak the name of this state again. Two, we bury you out here in the woods where nobody will ever find you." "We'll leave," Jimmy Burke gasped. "Christ, we'll leave. Just let us go." Good choice. They stripped the Burkes of their weapons, their money, and their shoes, just to make sure they couldn't change their minds and come back. Then they watched as the Burke brothers and their surviving men limped away into the darkness, heading east, heading anywhere but here. "Should have killed them," Spike muttered. "Maybe," Dwight said, "but then we'd be no better than they are." By October 1953, the Brotherhood controlled a significant portion of southern West Virginia. Dwight's influence extended over 7 towns and 2 counties. His network included over 100 active members and another 500 people who supported them in various ways. They'd become more than just Robin Hood thieves. They were a shadow government, administering a kind of rough justice in places where the official law had failed. When someone needed protection, they came to the Brotherhood. When someone was wronged, they came to the Brotherhood. When hungry children needed feeding, the Brotherhood provided. But with power came problems. Serious problems. Problem 1. The money. At first, distributing stolen food had been simple. Give it to those who needed it. But as the organization grew, finances became complex. They needed to pay informants, buy weapons, maintain safe houses, support the families of members who'd been arrested or killed. And not everyone was happy with how resources were distributed. There were arguments about fairness, about who deserved help and who didn't. Some members wanted to take more for themselves, argued they were risking their lives and deserved better than the people they were helping. Dwight had to crack down hard, reminding everyone of the original rules. 1/3 to the needy, 1/3 to operations, 1/3 split among participants. No exceptions. But the resentment lingered. Problem 2. Violence. The Brotherhood had started with a promise. Violence only as a last resort. But as they grew, as the threats became more serious, violence became more common. Rufus was the main instrument of that violence, and it was destroying him. The giant had always been quiet, but now he was becoming withdrawn, almost catatonic. He'd go days without sleeping, would wake up screaming from nightmares, though he couldn't make any sound, his body convulsing in silent horror. He'd started mutilating himself, scratching at the scars on his throat until they bled again. Doc Morrison tried to help, but what Rufus had wasn't a medical condition. It was a moral one. He was becoming the monster everyone feared, and he knew it, and he couldn't stop. "He's breaking," Doc told Dwight one night. "Whatever he went through in the war, whatever they did to him, it broke something inside. And what we're making him do now, it's breaking what was left." "What am I supposed to do?" Dwight asked. "He's the only one who can do what he does." Without him, you'll have to find another way. Because if you keep using him like this, he's either going to kill himself or go completely insane." Problem 3. The authorities. Brennan might have been neutralized, but there were bigger fish in the sea. The state government in Charleston had noticed the situation in southern West Virginia. Organized crime, vigilante justice, parallel government. It was an embarrassment, a threat to order. In September 1953, they sent someone to investigate.
His name was Colonel Marcus Dwight, no relation, State Police, Special Investigator for the Governor's Office. He was a hard man, a veteran of World War II with a reputation for breaking criminal organizations. He arrived in Blackwater Hollow with a squad of state troopers and a federal warrant for the arrest of persons unknown associated with organized criminal activity. The colonel didn't mess around with subtlety. He set up headquarters in the county courthouse and started hauling people in for questioning. He arrested Sam Keene on suspicion of theft. He arrested Hank Mercer on suspicion of receiving stolen property. He raided Doc Morrison's clinic and shut it down, and he made it clear he was going after Dwight Crow. The confrontation happened on October 13, 1953, exactly 1 year after their first robbery. Colonel Marcus summoned Dwight to the courthouse. It wasn't a request. Dwight went, but not alone. Rufus wanted to come, but Dwight refused. "This is official business. You show up, it looks like intimidation." So he went alone, walking up the courthouse steps under the eyes of a dozen state troopers in their blue uniforms and wide-brimmed hats. The colonel was waiting in the judge's chambers, sitting behind the bench like it was his throne. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too much and believed too little. "Sergeant Crow," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Have a seat." "I'll stand." "Suit yourself." The colonel opened a file folder. "Let's be direct. I know you're running an organization. I know you've been robbing company property. I know you've been distributing stolen goods. I know you've assaulted, kidnapped, and possibly murdered several individuals. I have witnesses. I have evidence. And I have the authority to arrest you right now." "So why haven't you?" "Because I'm trying to understand something." The colonel leaned forward. "You're a decorated veteran. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart. You fought for your country, earned respect. Why throw it all away for this? Why become a criminal?" "I'm not a criminal," Dwight said quietly. "I'm doing what the law should have done, but didn't." "That's not how it works. We have laws, we have courts, we have a system. The system's broken, Colonel. The system lets men like Silas Brennan starve children while they get rich. The system lets rapists walk free because they're connected. The system protects the powerful and crushes the weak. I didn't throw away my service. I'm continuing it, fighting for Americans who can't fight for themselves." The colonel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let me tell you something, Sergeant. I fought in the war too. Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, all the way to Berlin. I saw things that would turn your stomach, and you know what I learned? Order matters. Civilization matters. Without order, we're just animals tearing each other apart. What you're doing, it feels righteous, I'm sure, but it's chaos. It's mob rule. And if I let it continue, it'll spread. Every county in West Virginia will have their own little warlord, their own vigilante deciding who lives and who dies. That ain't America, son. That's anarchy." "Better anarchy than tyranny," Dwight said. "Is it?" The colonel stood up, walked around the bench. "I'm going to give you one chance, Sergeant. One chance to walk away. Disband your organization, cooperate with my investigation, testify against the ringleaders. I am the ringleader. Then testify against the company officials who've been breaking the law. Help me build a legitimate case. Work within the system to fix the system. Do that, and I'll make sure you get leniency. Maybe just a year in prison, maybe probation. And if I refuse, then I arrest everyone. Every man, woman, and child who's helped you. Every family that received your stolen goods becomes an accessory. I turn this whole county upside down until I find evidence to put you away for the rest of your life." Dwight looked at the colonel for a long moment. Then he said, "You do what you gotta do, Colonel. But know this, you come after my people, they'll fight back. This ain't Korea where you can just arrest folks and ship them off.
These are Americans on American soil defending their homes. You make this a war, it'll be a war you don't win. Is that a threat? It's a fact.
That night, Dwight called an emergency meeting of the entire Brotherhood, all 100+ members, gathering in an abandoned mine shaft because it was the only place big enough and secret enough to hold them all. He stood on a wooden platform, lit by kerosene lanterns, looking at the faces of people who'd trusted him, followed him, risked everything for him. "You all know about the state police," he began. "You know they're coming for us. And I want you to know, this is my fault. I pushed too hard, took too many risks. I made us a target. The colonel offered me a deal. I disband the Brotherhood, cooperate with their investigation, and they go easy on me. Maybe just a year in prison." Murmurs ran through the crowd. I turned him down. The murmurs became shouts, some supportive, some angry, everyone confused. "I turned him down," Dwight continued, "because taking that deal means betraying you. It means letting them destroy everything we built. And I won't do that. But I also won't force you to follow me into this fight. Anyone who wants out, walk away now. No judgment, no consequences. The colonel's fight is with me, not with you." Nobody moved. Dwight waited, giving them time. Still, nobody moved. Finally, Hank Mercer spoke up from the crowd. "We're with you, Dwight. Whatever comes." "You sure? Because what's coming is bad. They'll arrest us, put us in prison. Our families will suffer. Some of us might die." "We've been suffering our whole lives," someone shouted from the back. "At least now we're suffering for something that matters." Others voiced agreement. And slowly Dwight realized they weren't going to abandon him. For better or worse, they were in this together. "All right then," he said. "Then we fight. But we fight smart. We don't attack the state police. That makes us cop killers, and there's no coming back from that. We go underground, scatter, make ourselves ghosts, and we keep doing what we've been doing, feeding the hungry, protecting the weak. Just quieter." "And what about you?" Sam asked. "I'm staying visible. If the colonel wants me, let him come get me. But he'll have to work for it." That night, after the meeting, Rufus found Dwight alone in the church basement. The giant sat down next to him without a word. "We made a hell of a mess, didn't we?" Dwight said. Rufus nodded. "You know this probably ends bad. Ends with us dead or in prison." Rufus signed. "Better than living on our knees." "Maybe. Or maybe we're just fooling ourselves. Maybe we're not freedom fighters. Maybe we're just criminals with a good story." Rufus was quiet for a long moment. Then he signed. "Saved Mrs. Fletcher. Saved Sarah McBride. Saved 200 families from starving. That's not a story. That's real." "Yeah," Dwight said. "Yeah, I guess it is." The final confrontation came 3 weeks later, on November 3rd, 1953. Colonel Marcus had run out of patience. He'd arrested 24 people on various charges, but nobody talked. The code of silence held. So he decided to force the issue. He announced he was raiding the church basement, Dwight's known headquarters, and he let it be known publicly that he was coming at 6 a.m. sharp. It was a trap, obviously. He wanted Dwight to either show up and get arrested or run and look like a coward. Dwight chose a third option. He showed up, but brought the entire Brotherhood with him. At 5:30 a.m., as the sun was just starting to rise, over 100 people gathered around the old church. Not armed, Dwight had been explicit about that, but present, visible, refusing to hide. When Colonel Marcus arrived with his troopers at 6 a.m., he found himself facing a crowd. Not a mob. They weren't threatening, weren't violent. Just standing there. Miners in their work clothes, women holding babies, old men leaning on canes. All of them silent, all of them watching. And at the front, standing on the church steps, were Dwight Crow and Rufus. The colonel got out of his car slowly, assessing the situation. He had 20 troopers with him, good men, well-trained, but they were facing 100 civilians, and shooting civilians was not something anyone wanted to do. "Sergeant Crow," the colonel called out, "this doesn't have to be difficult. Come quietly and nobody gets hurt." "Can't do that, Colonel." "You're making this worse for yourself." "I'm making a stand. There's a difference." The colonel walked closer, stopping maybe 10 feet away. Behind him, his troopers shifted nervously, hands on their weapons, but not drawing them. "Look around you," the colonel said. "Look at these people. You think you're helping them? All you're doing is giving them false hope. Eventually, the law wins. It always wins. And when it does, all these people who trusted you, they're going to pay the price." "Maybe," Dwight said, "or maybe we're the start of something bigger. Maybe people across this state, across this country, are tired of being crushed, tired of watching their children starve while rich men get richer, tired of a system that protects the powerful and punishes the poor. Maybe we're the first crack in a dam that's about to break." "That's sedition you're talking about." "No, sir. That's America. The real America, not the one in civics books. The America that fought a revolution because the government forgot who it was supposed to serve." The colonel stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Last chance, Sergeant. Come quietly or I arrest everyone here." "You gonna arrest 100 people? Where you gonna put them? The county jail holds maybe 20. You gonna arrest women holding babies? Old men with black lung? Go ahead, Colonel. Show these people what law and order looks like." For a moment, the situation hung in perfect balance. The troopers looked to their colonel, waiting for orders. The crowd held its breath. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone started singing. It was the Star-Spangled Banner. Others joined in, and within seconds, the entire crowd was singing the national anthem. These people, criminals, according to the law, singing about the land of the free and the home of the brave. The colonel's face twisted. He looked at his men, saw the uncertainty there, saw that they didn't want to arrest people who were singing the national anthem, saw that maybe, just maybe, he was on the wrong side of this. "Stand down," he said quietly to his troopers. "Sir?" one of them asked, confused. "I said stand down." Louder now. "We're leaving." He turned back to Dwight. "This isn't over, Sergeant. I'll be back with federal marshals, with the FBI if I have to. And next time, there won't be any speeches or songs. Next time, you're going to prison." "I'll be here," Dwight said. The colonel and his troopers drove away, and the crowd erupted in cheers. But Dwight didn't celebrate. He knew, they all knew, that this was just a temporary reprieve. The hammer would fall eventually. The betrayal came from where Dwight least expected it. Red Pete Dalton, one of the original members, one of the first to sign on, a man Dwight had trusted with his life. Pete had been in the Brotherhood from the start, had participated in a dozen operations, had taken the oath. But Pete had a weakness. He liked to talk. Liked to brag about what he'd done, how tough he was, how the Brotherhood was feared throughout the state. And one night, drunk in a bar in the next county over, he talked to the wrong person. That wrong person was an FBI informant, planted specifically to gather information on the Brotherhood. Pete didn't realize his mistake until 2 days later, when federal agents kicked in his door at 3 a.m. and offered him a deal. Cooperate or go to federal prison for 20 years on charges of organized crime, racketeering, and assorted felonies. Pete took the deal. He gave them everything: names, locations, operations, the whole organizational structure. He wore a wire to meetings, recorded conversations, gathered evidence. It took 2 weeks for the Brotherhood to realize they had a traitor. Quiet noticed first. He'd been watching Pete as part of routine security, and he saw Pete meeting with someone in an unmarked car, having conversations that looked too serious, too secretive. Quiet followed Pete for 3 days, documented everything, brought his findings to Dwight. "We need to be sure," Dwight said, though his heart had already dropped to his stomach. "Pete, one of the originals, a friend." "I'm sure," Quiet said. "Saw him meet with FBI twice. Saw him hand over documents. Could be he's being coerced. Could be they threatened his family. Could be, but the result's the same. He's giving them everything." Dwight called an emergency meeting, just the core leadership. When Pete showed up, he knew something was wrong immediately. The way everyone looked at him. The way Rufus stood blocking the door. "Pete," Dwight said quietly, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About who you've been meeting with." Pete's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie, not now. We know about the FBI. We know you've been feeding them information. Just tell me why. Tell me they threatened your family. Tell me they forced you. Tell me something that makes sense." Pete's shoulders sagged. The lies crumbled. "They offered me a deal. Said if I cooperated, they'd give me immunity, relocate my family, give us a fresh start somewhere else. And you took it. My kids, Dwight. I got 3 kids. I can't go to prison for 20 years. They'll grow up without a father. I can't." "We all got families," Spike shouted. "We all got people we love. But we keep our goddamn mouths shut because that's the code." "You sold us out," Hank said, his voice heavy with betrayal. "Men who would have died for you. You sold us all out for a deal." "I'm sorry," Pete whispered. "God help me, I'm sorry. But I couldn't do the time." Dwight stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. His reflection stared back at him, and he barely recognized the man he saw. Hard, cold, capable of what needed doing. "How much have you given them?" he asked without turning around. "Everything. Names, locations, operations. They're planning raids for next week. They're going to arrest everyone." Jesus Christ. The room was silent. Finally, Dwight turned back. Everybody out except Rufus. The others filed out slowly, each of them giving Pete looks ranging from disgust to pity. When they were alone, just Dwight, Rufus, and Pete, Dwight said, "You know what has to happen now." "Please," Pete whispered. "Please, Dwight, we're friends. We fought together. I made a mistake, but nothing. You betrayed us. You signed death warrants for every man in this organization. And for what? A deal? A promise from the FBI that they probably won't keep? My kids, your kids, would rather have a father in prison than a father who's a rat." Dwight's voice was like ice. "But that's not even the point anymore. The point is, if I let you walk away, if I show mercy, then every person in the Brotherhood will know that betrayal has no consequences. And then this whole thing falls apart." Pete looked at Rufus, pleading silently. The giant stared back with those flat, emotionless eyes. "Rufus," Dwight said, "take him outside. Make it quick." They found Pete's body the next morning in the woods, half a mile from town. Single bullet to the head, execution style. No torture, no drawn-out suffering. Dwight had insisted on that. Pete had been a friend once, even if he'd become a traitor. On his chest, someone had carved with a knife, "Judas, the price of betrayal." The FBI went ballistic. They'd lost their informant, and their case had just gotten much weaker. The raids happened as scheduled, but without Pete's testimony, they couldn't make most of the charges stick. They arrested 15 people, including Dwight. But with no evidence except circumstantial testimony, they had to release most of them within 48 hours. Dwight they held longer, 2 weeks, trying to break him, trying to get him to talk. But he'd survived Chinese interrogation in Korea. The FBI didn't scare him. Eventually, they had to let him go too. But the damage was done. The Brotherhood had killed one of their own, and everyone knew it. The line between justice and murder had blurred completely. Winter 1953 came early and hard. Snow started falling in November and didn't stop. The mines shut down for weeks because of the weather, leaving families without income right when they needed it most. The Brotherhood did what it could, distributing food and fuel. But resources were tight, tensions were high, and cracks were showing in the organization. The biggest crack was Rufus. The giant had been deteriorating for months, and Pete's execution broke something inside him. He'd killed plenty of people in the war, had done terrible things to survive. But killing Pete, someone who'd been a friend, someone from their own organization, that was different. Rufus stopped sleeping entirely, would stand watch all night staring into the darkness, seeing things that weren't there. He'd scratch at the scars on his throat until they bled, would pound his head against walls until Dwight had to physically stop him. Doc Morrison tried everything. Sedatives, therapy, such as it was, even morphine. Nothing worked. Rufus was disappearing into his own mind, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. "He needs a hospital," Doc said. "Professional psychiatric care. What he's got, I can't treat it." "He goes to a hospital, the FBI will grab him," Dwight said. "He's wanted on 24 felonies. They'll lock him up in a federal psych ward for the rest of his life." "He's already locked up, in his own mind. At least in a hospital they might be able to help him." But Rufus refused. He'd spent 6 months in a military psych ward after the war, and the experience had been traumatic enough that he'd rather die than go back. So he stayed, deteriorating, becoming the ghost of the giant he'd once been. On December 19th, 1953, 2 things happened that would lead to the end. First, the FBI sent a new agent to Blackwater Hollow, Special Agent Thomas Blackwood, a legend in the Bureau. He'd taken down the Gambino crime family in New York, had broken the Kansas City mob, had a conviction rate of 97%. Blackwood was different from Colonel Marcus. He wasn't interested in speeches or philosophy. He just wanted to destroy the Brotherhood, and he didn't care how he did it. He set up operations in a house on the edge of town, brought in a team of 20 agents, and started systematically dismantling the organization. Not with big raids, those hadn't worked. With small, precise operations, arresting key members on minor charges, holding them on technicalities, making bail impossible, freezing bank accounts, what few the Brotherhood had, pressuring businesses that supported them, turning the screws slowly, methodically. Within 2 weeks, the Brotherhood lost a quarter of its membership, not to arrests, but to people who just couldn't take the pressure anymore and walked away. Second, Silas Brennan made his move. He'd been quiet since Dwight's threat about the ledgers, but he'd been planning. And in December, with the Brotherhood weakened and distracted by the FBI, he struck. He'd convinced a judge in Charleston, a judge he'd been paying off for years, to issue eviction notices for every house on Strikers Row. The houses were company property, and Brennan claimed the current occupants were behind on rent. It was a lie, but it was a legal lie, and it gave Brennan the excuse to start kicking families out of their homes in the middle of winter. Starting with Martha Crow, Dwight's mother. They came for her on December 21st, 2 days before Christmas. Brennan's enforcers, backed up by a county sheriff's deputy, also on Brennan's payroll, showed up with eviction papers and orders to remove all occupants immediately. Martha Crow, weak and sick with pneumonia, was dragged from her house in her nightgown and put on the street in sub-zero temperatures. A neighbor ran to get Dwight,
who'd been at the church basement coordinating with what remained of the Brotherhood leadership. By the time he got home, his mother was sitting in the snow, shivering, crying, while Brennan's men loaded her meager possessions onto a truck, not to store them, but to throw them in the dump. Something inside Dwight snapped. He'd maintained control for over a year, had tried to be strategic, measured, smart, had resisted the urge for simple violence, but seeing his mother in the snow, seeing the smirks on Brennan's enforcers' faces. "Put her back inside," Dwight said, his voice deadly quiet. Carl Dirksen, the lead enforcer, laughed. "Got an eviction notice right here, signed by a judge. She's out, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Put her back inside." "Or what? You gonna fight the law, Crow? That worked out real well for—" Dwight hit him. One punch right to the throat, dropping Carl like a stone. Then he turned to the deputy. "You gonna arrest me, or you gonna help my mother back into her house?" The deputy looked at Dwight, at the growing crowd of neighbors, at Carl gasping on the ground. He made a decision. "Didn't see nothing," he said, and walked back to his car. Eugene Dirksen, Carl's brother, made the mistake of reaching for his gun. Dwight broke his arm before he could clear leather. "Anyone else?" Dwight asked the other enforcers. They left, all of them, drove away and left the Dirksen brothers bleeding in the snow. Dwight carried his mother back inside, wrapped her in blankets, started a fire in the stove. She was barely conscious, fever burning through her. "Stay with me, Mama," he whispered. "Please stay with me." But he knew, deep down he knew, this was the beginning of the end. Brennan went nuclear. He filed charges against Dwight for assault, battery, resisting eviction, destruction of company property, Eugene's broken arm. He got a judge to issue an arrest warrant with no bail, and he went to Special Agent Blackwood with an offer. Brennan would provide evidence of the Brotherhood's activities if the FBI would guarantee Dwight went to federal prison for life. Blackwood took the deal. The raids happened on January 2nd, 1954, exactly 14 months after the first warehouse robbery. Coordinated strikes across 5 towns, 50 FBI agents, 200 state troopers, local sheriffs, all mobilized. They hit every known Brotherhood location simultaneously, arrested 83 people, seized weapons, documents, stolen property. Dwight wasn't home when they came for him. He'd been at his mother's bedside. She was dying, pneumonia turning into something worse. Hank Mercer managed to get word to him. "FBI's coming. Everybody's arrested. Blackwood says he'll burn down Blackwater Hollow if you don't surrender." "Where's Rufus?" Dwight asked. "Don't know. He disappeared 3 days ago. Nobody's seen him." Dwight looked at his mother, barely breathing, her hand in his. He couldn't leave her, wouldn't leave her. If the FBI wanted him, they'd have to come through her to get him. Martha Crow died at 3:47 a.m. on January 3rd, 1954. Her son was holding her hand. The FBI arrived at 4:15 a.m. Blackwood himself led the team. 20 agents in body armor, weapons drawn. They surrounded the house, called for Dwight to come out. He came out, unarmed, hands up, covered in his mother's blood from where he'd held her as she died. "Dwight Crow," Blackwood said, "you're under arrest for—" "Save it," Dwight said. "I know the charges. Just get it over with." They cuffed him, put him in a car. As they drove away, Dwight looked back at his house, his mother's house, and wondered if he'd ever see it again. He wouldn't. The trial was a spectacle. Federal courthouse in Charleston, standing room only, reporters from newspapers across the country. The FBI had built a case so comprehensive, so overwhelming, that Dwight's court-appointed attorney advised him to plead guilty and hope for leniency. Dwight refused. If he was going down, he was going down fighting. The prosecution called 60 witnesses over 3 weeks. They documented every robbery, every assault, every crime the Brotherhood had committed.
They presented ledgers, photographs, testimony from reformed members who'd taken deals. They painted Dwight as a domestic terrorist, a crime boss, a murderer. The defense had almost nothing. No witnesses who'd testify. They were all in jail or too scared. No documents. Everything had been seized. Just Dwight's testimony, which the prosecution shredded on cross-examination. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in federal prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years for the various associated crimes. "Mr. Crow," the judge said, "you committed these crimes under the delusion that you were helping people, that you were serving justice. But justice is not yours to serve. Justice belongs to the law, to society, to the people acting collectively through their government. What you created was not justice. It was tyranny. The tyranny of one man's vision imposed on everyone else. I hope you spend your time in prison reflecting on the damage you've done, not just to the law, but to the people who trusted you. Because of you, 83 people are facing federal charges. Because of you, families are destroyed. Because of you, the reputation of West Virginia has been tarnished. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court certainly doesn't." Dwight stood to hear the sentence without expression. No tears, no pleas, no remorse. "Your Honor," he said when the judge finished, "I'd like to say something." "You've said enough, Mr. Crow. Just one thing, please." The judge sighed. "Make it quick." Dwight turned to face the packed courtroom. His eyes found faces he knew, people from Blackwater Hollow who'd traveled to Charleston for the trial. Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah McBride, the families he'd fed. "I don't regret what I did," he said. "I know I'm supposed to. I know that's what everyone wants to hear, but I don't. I came home from war to find my people starving, suffering, dying, and nobody in power gave a damn. The company stole from us. The law protected them. The system failed us. So yeah, I broke the law. I organized others to break the law, and I'd do it again because sometimes the law is wrong. Sometimes justice requires going outside the system. Sometimes tyranny wears a suit and tie instead of a uniform. You're putting me in prison. Fine. I earned it. But don't pretend this is about law and order. This is about power. About punishing anyone who dares challenge the people who run things. About making an example so nobody else gets ideas." "Are you finished?" the judge asked coldly. "Almost. I just want to say to everyone who followed me, who believed in what we were doing, I'm sorry. Sorry I failed you. Sorry I couldn't protect you. But I ain't sorry for trying. And I hope someone else picks up where we left off, because this fight ain't over. It won't be over until every American can feed their children, until the system serves the people instead of the powerful, until justice means something more than what's written in law books. Now, are you finished?" "Yeah, I'm finished." They led him away in chains, and as he walked out of the courtroom, the people from Blackwater Hollow stood. All of them. Stood in silence, a gesture of respect that the judge couldn't stop and the prosecution couldn't prevent. Dwight Crow disappeared into the federal prison system, and most of America forgot about him within a year. But in Blackwater Hollow, they remembered. Rufus never went to trial. The giant vanished 3 days before the raids, and despite massive manhunts, they never found him. Some said he'd died in the woods, killed himself rather than face capture. Others claimed he'd fled to Canada or Mexico or deep into the Appalachian wilderness where federal agents wouldn't follow. But there were other stories. stranger stories. A week after Dwight's sentencing, Carl Dirksen, the enforcer who'd dragged Martha Crow into the snow, was found in his house, dead from a heart attack. Except his face was frozen in terror, and neighbors reported hearing him screaming about a giant at his window the night before he died. A month later, Silas Brennan was driving home from Charleston when his Cadillac went off the road and down a ravine. He survived but was paralyzed from the waist down. When investigators checked the car, they found the brake lines had been cut, cleanly, professionally, and in the dirt next to the road they found a single, massive footprint. Over the next 5 years, 15 people connected to the case, FBI agents, prosecutors, company officials, died or were injured in mysterious circumstances. The FBI launched investigations but never found evidence of a coordinated campaign, just accidents, coincidences, bad luck. But the people in Blackwater Hollow knew better. They'd see shadows moving in the woods at night, too large to be any natural animal. They'd find food left on doorsteps, bags of flour, canned goods, just like the old days. And sometimes, just sometimes, they'd catch a glimpse of a massive figure watching from the tree line. The silent man, the crow's shadow, Rufus, the Avenger. Still out there, still watching, still protecting. Dwight Crow died in federal prison in 1979, 25 years after his conviction. Official cause, lung cancer, likely from exposure to coal dust during his childhood. He was 69 years old. The FBI offered to ship his body back to West Virginia for burial, but his lawyer, one of the few people who'd maintained contact over the years, said there was no family left to claim it. So they cremated him, and his ashes sat in a federal storage facility for 6 months. Then they disappeared. Nobody knew how, nobody knew who. Security footage showed nothing. Guards saw nothing. The ashes of Dwight Crow simply vanished. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Blackwater Hollow post office. Inside was an urn with Dwight's ashes and a note in block capitals: "Bury him with honor." The town gave him a funeral that shut down Main Street. Hundreds of people came, people he'd fed, people he'd protected, children who'd grown up on stories of the Blackwater Brotherhood. They buried him in the town cemetery next to his mother's grave. The headstone read, "Dwight the Crow, 1910 to 1979, Sergeant, U.S. Army." He fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. At the funeral, Mrs. Fletcher, now 92 years old, somehow still alive, spoke. "People ask me, was Dwight Crow a criminal or a hero? And I say, he was both. He was what happens when good men are pushed too far by bad systems. He was what America becomes when we forget who we're supposed to serve. Was he perfect? No. Did he make mistakes? Plenty. Did innocent people suffer because of what he did? Probably. But I'm alive today because of him. My grandson's alive because of him. 200 families in this town are alive because of him. So call him what you want, but I call him an angel. A dark angel, maybe. A fallen angel. But an angel all the same." The funeral ended. People dispersed. But as the sun set, someone noticed a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery. Massive, silent, watching. By the time anyone got close enough to see clearly, it was gone. The legend of the Blackwater Brotherhood grew in the years after Dwight's death. Books were written, documentaries filmed, folk songs composed. Some portrayed them as heroes, some as criminals, most as something in between. The site of their old church basement headquarters became a kind of pilgrimage spot. Tourists would come take pictures, leave flowers, sometimes money for the Brotherhood Museum that the town opened in 1995. In the 1990s, when the coal company finally collapsed under its own corruption and bad management, people noted the irony. The organization Dwight fought against destroyed itself, doing exactly what he'd accused them of: stealing, lying, putting profits over people. Some of the Brotherhood's old members, those who'd survived, who'd served their sentences, started a veteran support organization that continues to this day. They help veterans get benefits, find housing, deal with PTSD. They call it the Crow Foundation. And every year on January 3rd, the anniversary of Martha Crow's death, people gather at the cemetery in Blackwater Hollow. They leave bread at Dwight's grave. He'd always loved his mother's bread. They share stories. They remember. And sometimes, if you're there at twilight, if you listen carefully, you might hear something in the woods. Not a voice. Rufus never had a voice, but a presence. A watching. A promise that someone still guards the vulnerable, still watches over the weak. The silent man. The crow's shadow. Still out there. Still protecting. Still keeping the faith. Epilogue. The question. So was Dwight Crow a hero or a villain? A freedom fighter or a terrorist? A champion of the people or a self-appointed dictator? The answer, like most things in life, isn't simple. He broke the law, undeniably, repeatedly, without apology. He used violence, not casually, but when he deemed it necessary. He built an organization that operated outside democratic governance, answerable only to his own moral code. These are not small things. But he also fed hundreds of families who were starving. He protected vulnerable people from predators. He stood up to a system that was crushing his community, that treated human beings as disposable resources. These are not small things either. Maybe the real lesson of Dwight Crow isn't about whether he was right or wrong. Maybe it's about what drives people to such extremes, about what happens when institutions fail, when systems break, when the gap between the law and justice becomes too wide. Maybe it's a warning. If you push people too far, if you make them choose between lawful suffering and unlawful survival, some of them will choose survival, and they'll become what circumstances demand, sometimes saints, sometimes monsters, usually both. In a museum in Charleston, West Virginia, there's an exhibit about the Blackwater Brotherhood. It's balanced, academic, trying to present both sides fairly. But if you go to Blackwater Hollow itself, if you talk to the old-timers who remember those days, you'll get a different story. They'll tell you about cold winters when food appeared on doorsteps, about predators who disappeared into the night, about a time when someone stood up and said, "No more." And they'll take you to the cemetery, show you Dwight's grave. Every day, every single day, there's fresh bread there, homemade, wrapped in cloth, still warm sometimes. Who brings it? Nobody knows. Nobody asks. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some legends are better left alive. And some shadows never truly die. They just wait in the woods, watching, protecting, remembering when someone dared to fight back. Or is it? Because in the mountains of West Virginia, on cold winter nights, people still report seeing something. A massive figure, silent and watchful. And if you're in trouble, if you're hurt or hungry or scared, if you're one of the vulnerable people that the world's forgotten, you might find help in unexpected places. You might find that the crow's shadow still keeps the faith, still protects the weak, still fights for those who can't fight for themselves. And maybe that's all any of us can ask for. Someone to stand up when standing up matters, even if the cost is everything. even if history never quite decides if they were heroes or villains. Sometimes the only thing that matters is that someone tried.